If you're interested in sound design for games, movies, trailers, or animations, you will most likely have to learn how to work with raw recordings instead of just synthesizing sounds and using DAWs. There are a few things that I like to do with my recordings to create new sounds. So something that I always like to do is to pitch the samples around and see how they sound at a lower pitch or a higher pitch. And then I also use these different pitched versions to layer them on top of each other. For example, this is the original raw recording. Now I would just take this and maybe pitch it down quite a bit to create a really low-end heavy version. Now this gives me a nice rumbly tail. I can actually copy this again and just pitch it up a bit more, but still lower than the original sample. And then I can also create a high-pitched version that's more of a click sound for the transient or the attack of the sound. Now, of course, I can just either use these individually or I just layer them on top of each other. Now, the second thing that I tend to do a lot is to reverse sounds and then also combine this with pitching up and pitching down. So if I reverse this sample, I get just a typical suckback sound. This can be a great transitional element, and you can also just create different versions now by pitching this up or down. Very often these down-pitched versions are great elements for slow motion sound effects or more textural layers for sound designing movements. The third thing that I like to do is to use warping and stretching of the samples. This is going to depend on which DAW you're using because they all have their different warp algorithms and stretching algorithms, but I'm quite happy with the ones in Ableton. So in Ableton I would just enable the warp and then play around with the different warp modes that I have here and with the pitch. With the beats mode you can easily get sort of user interface sounds, glitchy sounds if you pitch the sound up a lot. And then with the other modes you can get a lot of synthetic sounding elements. And you can also of course combine this with pitch modulation, so you can automate the pitch here. So this one sounds interesting to me. Another mode that I really like is the texture mode, if you want to make more granular sounds. And now we can also, of course, combine this with just stretching the sound. So this sounds interesting too. And now with a bunch of elements like these, you could also just create a more complex sound. For instance, we could just use these as short suckback elements, layer these more synthetic sounding ones, stretched ones on top. So now all these elements are coming just from one sample. So the more recordings you have, the more recordings of different stuff you have, the more interesting sounds you're gonna get and the more variety you're gonna get. So at this point you could either just save these individual elements or the ones that you like, or you could start sort of going through the process that I have shown in my last video, where you would go through the different sounds and see if they fit with the other elements, maybe add other completely different sounds or replace some of these sounds, and then just do some volume automation before you actually start adding more effects. And then you could also automate those just to get a very detailed and precise sound effect.